Hi guys, welcome to your week 5 lecture on the structure of an essay. We're going over these notes, and as I walk through them, I will talk about specific applications to your personal narrative essay. However, the notes that you see in front of you, and I've linked these in the FYI section of this week, these notes can effectively work for any academic essay that you write. So academic writing is very formulaic. Professional writers, authors, people who write books and things like that, they don't have to keep themselves in adherence to these rules. But when you're writing an essay, and especially in this class, and especially for your personal narrative essay, this is the structure that I want you to follow. You'll notice that the examples we're looking at this week give you the right content in terms of what the personal narrative is asking you to do, but they don't follow this structure. And again, that's because they're written by more professional writers who kind of have the ability to break the rules. And I don't know if I've said this to you guys before, but I know I've said this to my face-to-face students. So once you know all of the rules, then you could break all of the rules. So if you ever want to become like a published author or something like that, you can break the rules then. But for now, let's focus on just what the structure is, so that you know it and you can apply it to a history class or a communications class. If you take my English 112 course ever, we will walk through the same structure in that class as well. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. It's something that can be broken, but for our class, it's something I want you to adhere to. So I'm going to talk through these structure notes. They're very basic. They're very general. I will lecture in that I'll apply these notes to our personal narrative, but what you see on your paper is just kind of basic. So first things first, structure of an essay. I'm looking at an essay that has 3 segments: an introduction, body paragraphs, and a conclusion. In your introduction, I always claim that there should be 3 elements: a first, a middle, and an ending. And that first element to your introduction, and that's just your first paragraph for your essay, is your hook sentence or your attention grabber. You can write 1 sentence here, you can write 2, 3 sentences. Getting more than 3 sentences might be too much for a hook sentence or an attention grabber, but it really depends on the effectiveness of your writing as well. So some things you can do for that hook sentence or attention grabber is provide a shocking fact. And I think that a shocking fact or statistic works really well in maybe an argumentative essay or an informative essay, something that might not be the personal narrative. Although if there's something surprising that your personal narrative is going to cover, you could always put that in your introduction. You could even start with a story. Now, your personal narrative, of course, narrative is a story, so you are likely to already maybe want to start with a story, and I think that would work just fine here. In other assignments, you would want to figure out kind of what your teacher accepts, because usually stories are about you, although often stories can be about other people. And, if you're going to write a history paper, you'd want to probably find out if that was appropriate for the prompt if your instructor were asking you to write a paper. You can start with a question. There are some teachers out there that don't want students to start with questions, and I understand that. I think that maybe it's because it's like, kind of an easy way to get started, and it doesn't require too much thought. The thing about the question is, if you are going to start your essay with a question, you want to make sure by the end of that essay you've answered that question. So the questions to avoid, because you can't answer them, would be something like, do you like reading? Well, you can't answer the question for your reader, so you don't really want to engage your reader in that way. But asking a question that your essay will be able to answer by the conclusion can be much more effective if you're interested in trying that out. The other option that I think works well for a hook sentence or attention grabber is a quote, but I put a little asterisk here in our notes because I want to tell you 2 things. First, the quote is my least favorite way to start an introduction. Second, the reason for that is because most students don't do it very effectively. If you start with a quote, you want to make sure that it's a quote you've come to naturally. So kind of like with our quote paragraph, I didn't want you to just go to 1001quotes.com and Google something random and find a quote. And that's true here. If you intend to use a quote to start your personal narrative essay or any essay that you write where appropriate, you want to make sure that it's a quote that you found more organically, more naturally, rather than just like an offhand Google search. And the quote absolutely has to reflect the content of your writing. Avoid just plopping that quote in and then putting like a hyphen in the author of the quote and then writing a sentence. There's really no need to do that. You'll see that in literature. It happens sometimes at the beginning of a chapter, but again, literature is very different from academic writing. So if you're going to use a quote, integrate it smoothly into the flow of that introduction. If you have questions, or if you're thinking, well, I tend to start my essays like this. Is that acceptable? Send me an email and we can kind of go back and forth and say, yeah, that could work really well here, or what if you tried it this way? So after you've started out your introduction and you've given that hook sentence or attention grabber, depends on the teacher you have who calls it what, you want to segue into what I call the background information. And this is somewhere between 2 and 4 sentences in your intro. As your writing develops and gets more elevated, you might find that your background information gets longer. If you're writing a scholarly article in your future, if you're writing something like for my English 112 class, I ask my students to do much more elevated writing. That background information might lengthen, but for a basic essay that's anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 pages, you really don't need that much in your introduction. All you need to know for your background information is, what does the reader need to know about in order to better understand the ideas and the thoughtfulness that you'll present in your body paragraphs. So in a personal narrative, that might be, what are some small facts about you that matter for the content you're saying? For example, one of the examples that I hope you will read for this personal narrative that's housed in the FYI section for this week is called Superman and Me, and it's written by Sherman Alexie, who's a phenomenal writer, and I think we've looked at one of his examples already in this class. He, in his background information, kind of gives his reader a better understanding about his socioeconomic class while he was growing up on an Indian reservation, and that helps the reader to understand better the fact that for him, being good at school was really something that was not common where he lived because of how socioeconomic class affected students on the reservation and students' educations. So for him, that background information was necessary and relevant. The final sentence of your introduction is your thesis statement, and this is the one that teachers might argue is the most important sentence of your essay. And the reason that we would say that, and I agree, the reason that we would say that is because your thesis statement holds the main idea of your essay. So if your essay is on, as essays should be, on one narrowed subject, but you're going to explore that subject with details, description, storytelling, things like that, what's the main idea of your essay? That's your thesis statement. There's, and I might add to these notes actually after I record the rest of this video, but there's something that students do that I think is a convention that's learned maybe in high school, and I'm not really sure, it's been a while since I've been in high school, but I don't know where it comes from, but it's called a statement of intention. And that's very different from a thesis statement. So a thesis statement, if I'm going to give you a very basic example, let's say I asked you to write an essay about your 3 favorite colors. A thesis statement is, my 3 favorite colors are red, white, and blue. Or my 3 favorite colors are pink, purple, and orange. However, a statement of intention reflects the author saying what they intend to do. So a statement of intention sounds something like, in this essay, I will write about my 3 favorite colors. Or it might sound something like, this essay is about my 3 favorite colors, red, white, and blue, orange, purple, and pink, whatever. Telling your reader what you're going to write about is not a thesis statement. It's just different. You want to just do it, like go Nike style, right? Just write your sentence. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Just do it. It's like the topic sentence that we talked about before. You don't want to say this paragraph will be about. You just want to give that main idea. Start writing. Don't write in the future tense in your essay's thesis statement or topic sentences. So that's something to just kind of start working on and figure out the gist of, because eventually it'll be not acceptable in your future academic writing. So your thesis statement is going to state the main idea of your essay and reflect the structure and ideas presented in your essay in a very overview kind of way. It should be narrowed enough so that I see your focus, but broad enough so it's really just covering the main idea. And it's one sentence. If, as you I guess, go further in your academic career and your writing becomes more advanced and the papers that you are writing require much more detail and research, the thesis statement can be more than one sentence for sure. But at this level, in English 111, the thesis is just one sentence. We're going to do some practice with thesis statements in our weekly Moodle activity. So you'll definitely get some examples and you'll start to kind of work on writing a solid thesis for this upcoming paper. All right, I'm going to move into the body paragraphs. We've already had a huge discussion on body paragraphs. So I am not going to talk too much about body paragraphs here in this lecture, but what I will say is the body paragraph discussion that we had was in week 2. Certainly go back if you need a refresher on the details and specifics of the structure of a body paragraph. Go back to week 2 and check that out. Just as a recap, a body paragraph has to have 3 elements. It has to have a topic sentence, has to have supporting details. The topic sentence is going to tell you the main idea. The supporting details are going to support what you say in that topic sentence. And remember, you want to conclude on your own words. Don't end a body paragraph on a quote or a supporting detail. Always recap the main idea of that paragraph. Your body paragraphs should each one individually talk about one narrow topic that is an offshoot of your thesis statement. So the last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is the conclusion. For me, there's really just 2 things I need you to do in your conclusion. I want your conclusions to be kind of short, sweet, and to the point with a little bit of elaboration if necessary, but by the time you get to your conclusion, you've already made all of your key points. There's really nothing else to say, so you want to wrap it up and tell your readers why this matters. So first, restate your thesis statement. It can be 1 to 2 sentences. Your thesis and your introduction, I want a 1-sentence thesis statement, but in your conclusion, as you're restating, you can write up to 2 sentences for that thesis statement. You don't want to copy and paste it exactly as it was written in your introduction into your conclusion. And the reason for that is because you've written this beautiful essay and it's taken into consideration all sorts of details. And if this is your personal narrative, then it's about you and your life. So now that you've said all of that, your thesis, while still reflecting that main idea, can change a little bit, as it should. So keep that in mind. You should reword your thesis. And if it takes up to 2 sentences to do that, that's not a problem. So then what's important is so what? And this is really kind of like the purpose for writing. Why did you write this? And I think sometimes students want to say, well, because my teacher asked me to. Yeah, sure, I get that. But you could have written on a lot of things. You could have written your personal narrative about quotes or about bias, or you could have written your personal narrative on your literacy or on anything in your life, as long as it's reflecting something you know about yourself and it's reflecting how that influences other people and how you know that about yourself, right? Those elements of our prompt. So why did you pick what you picked? And by no means am I asking you to say, I picked this because, right? Again, that's that sort of like self-identifying your writing and your essay, and you don't want to do that. But why does this matter? You know, is there something that you can urge the reader to do? So if you wrote your essay and you wrote it on implicit bias, is it possible that you can urge your readers to go and find out what their implicit biases are? If you wrote it on your literacy, you know, why does literacy matter? If you wrote it on things that inspire you, or quotes, or things that are significant to you, you know, can you call your reader to take some kind of action, or even just if that action is a thought, you know, ask your reader to think about their own influences or inspirations. So that's really what you want to do in your conclusion, is give your reader something to think about. So what? Why does this matter? And restate your thesis. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in that order. As long as your conclusion flows out naturally and is effective, you're good. By the time I get to your conclusion, I can really understand kind of the effectiveness of your writing. So a conclusion should just end that essay altogether. Okay, so I think that this covers everything regarding the structure of an essay. I will be able to identify from your weekly Moodle activity in week 5 kind of how your ideas are organizing themselves based on your thesis statement and your topic sentences. So I think if anyone is struggling in that regard, I'll be able to identify that with you this week via email. Otherwise, if you guys have questions, let me know.